Then when we got to Jumbo Rocks, there's this beefy Marine type guy, was muscle bound with a t-shirt, it was a sweatshirt with an American flag, and looked like a drill sergeant from the local Marine base, 29 Palms, And he supposedly was taking nature shots, which was pretty funny because he had all these video cameras and single lens reflex. But every once in a while, he would pan the cameras over towards us and would be filming us instead of the nature across the campground. So they were pretty heavy-handed in the kind of surveillance. And in one instance, when we had experienced heavy surveillance, the next morning, we had an overflight of 3 waves of F-14s.
Welcome back. I'm here again with Dr. Joseph Burkes. Dr. Burkes, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay. So in the last episode, we established the misalignment in incentives as to between kind of global elites and disclosure, right? And kind of the phenomena. As part of that kind of dovetails into the way the phenomena interacts with people through contact events and things like that. Mm-hmm. I think you're on record as saying it operates akin to an intelligence network or aspiring, just to evoke more evocative language or to provide more evocative language. Say more about that.
Well, I have to mention that as being a student activist, I traveled and I went to Latin America. And in Latin America, they do not have the strength of democratic forms that allow people to peacefully demonstrate. When I was a teenager, I was 19, I went to Mexico for 2 months to study the language. It was 1969. The previous year, over 400 people were gunned down in the Plaza de las Tres Culturas in Mexico City, in the neighborhood called Tlatelolco. And they were demanding an end to the corrupt government, which eventually was deposed, And I attended clandestine meetings of student groups that had been driven underground because their people were being killed. So I had some limited exposure to how authoritarian regimes will operate to suppress peaceful movements, or in the case of North America, there were even government agents who infiltrated our own student organizations. If you read the history of the CIA, you'll know that student groups were very thoroughly infiltrated.
Is that Counter-Intel Pro, basically?
Counter-Intel was directed also at the Black Panthers. That was FBI. Mm-hmm. But the CIA had student organizations, primarily international student organizations, but they had representatives in American groups too. So we had police agents operating. I mean, many of them were agent provocateurs. I remember in a peaceful demonstration that we were in Los Angeles, where I was a UCLA pre-medical student. We were demonstrating, I think that was the time of the invasion of Cambodia, which was a disaster for the Cambodian people. Mm-hmm. When the Pot Pal regime came to power as a result of the air war against them, 1.5 million people were killed by these crazy Maoists. That would not have occurred if the United States hadn't been fighting a clandestine war in that part of the world. In any case, there was this one guerrilla-like guy who claimed he was a peacenik, and he jumped on a table. I couldn't believe it. He was kind of about 45, 50, heavy set. He smashed the table, and he picked up the leg and the piece of the table that was still attached, and he starts going towards the cops saying, pigs off campus. And the guy looked like a cop. And we surrounded him. We said, you put that thing down right now. Because if you attack the police, they're going to hurt us. And somebody got the idea that he was a police agent, at which point a crowd started going after him, and he ran behind the police lines, confirming he was a police agent. Mm-hmm. So these are the conditions. I have to say that our democratic structures allowed the student movement to exist and not face the level of violence that they would face in a communist country or in a fascist country. But still, we had to organize and be aware of the intelligence aspect of what we were doing. So that experience and dealing with police agents and also ultra-left groups that try to infiltrate the students and take control and shift the agenda, all these sort of issues made me attuned to the way in which intelligence organizations operate. And because we are a planet that's steeped in conflict, because the establishment, as we discussed previously, is so determined, at least up until recently, to suppress this issue, people who are being contacted by the phenomena are being repressed. They have the triple trauma. They have the trauma of being exposed to non-human intelligence. Now, from the free study, we know that over time, as the number of contacts increase, the number of people who say their contacts are traumatic decreases, which suggests that some of the initial shock and terror that's experienced when facing a non-human being wears off over time. This is called ontological shock. And then they can sort of be more attuned to what they are receiving in terms of messages, spirituality, etc. So they're traumatized by the experience. They then go to their family, and try to share it with it, and they're ostracized by their family. And God forbid someone at work knows about it. Well, people have lost their jobs. They've been put in psychiatric hospitals for claiming contact with. So you've got this sort of repressive regime that compels contact experiencers to operate like an underground organization in a repressive society. And when I first started doing the work, of course, I was under the direction of Stephen Greer, who was what I eventually called a prime contactee. These are individuals who are lifelong contact experiencers. Most are men that I've worked with, but one woman. And at a very early age, they will have a sighting. And then, for no apparent reason, without much adult supervision, or perhaps none, they start meditating, deep levels of meditation. And this facilitates accessing what is called consciousness in its most unbounded form. In other words, meditation facilitates psychic development, and telepathic communication. And while in these advanced states of meditation, they receive information and instruction, like I received only on 2 occasions, when the number of craft were going to show up and what part of the sky. So they are able to serve almost like human UFO magnets.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
But in order to build a team, you have to be discreet. You cannot recruit people openly because the larger societies is fairly repressive. Now, I was a medical doctor already. I had 10, 12 years experience in my medical group before I started doing contact work. Everyone knew Dr. Burkes was okay. I worked in the ER, patients get admitted. When I was on duty, there was a very good chance they were going to make it and things were going to be in order when the attending doctors came in the morning. So I was able to openly, after about a year, told people, what I was doing. Of course, the nurses still would tease me. They would say, Dr. Burkes, are you going out this weekend to be abducted in the desert? And I would tease them back. I would say, you think that they're chasing me? I use my New York accent. You think that they're chasing me? Well, I'm chasing them. I'm chasing them. So I was in a privileged position. But other people in the group did not want it to be well known that they were going out and interacting with the phenomena. And because of the interest that the national security state has in this arena, they are in a position to not only carry out surveillance, but also to repress contact experiencers, to steal artifacts that may have been obtained, to damage video. One of my doctors who's on the team, brilliant guy, Dave Gordon, and his wife, Eve, both internal medicine doctors, they both did surveys of their patients with their administration's support of contact events that they had in their patients. And one of the patients gave us this incredible, it was not video, it was 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter film of a UFO. Well, we sent it to a prominent physicist working for the Navy who recently died.
Is that Bruce Maccabee?
Yeah, Bruce Maccabee. And Bruce Maccabee was effusive. Oh, this is great. If this had come out in the 50s when it was obtained, it would have changed ufology. Well, he sent it back to us. And when the tape came back to us, the part of the UFO was cut out. And
what did he say?
Well, we didn't really notify anybody. I think what happened was we turned it over to a lab because the woman wanted to have it put on video. And that's when we discovered that it was missing. When she got the video, this UFO was missing. So we went to the lab that had done the transfer and we said, hey, did you cut this out? And he says, no. And he showed us the videotape. He showed us the 8 millimeter of film. And he said, this is a cold splicing procedure. Why do something different? This was done by someone other than him. So then we got in touch with Maccabee and he said, no, I sent it back through the mail. Well, how did they get it then? How did the people who cut it up? Because they monitor our telephone communications, because they monitor our email traffic. One time before I went into the field, this was in 96. It's a very long story, but briefly, every hour on the hour from Monday through Friday, we'd get a phone call on the landline. We didn't have cell phones at that time, or maybe we did, but just for me. And we'd pick up the phone. No one was there. We were planning to go out to Joshua Tree on a such and such date. And we'd listen. No one was there. An hour later, call, listen, no one was there. It was like someone was saying, we know you're going out into the field. We're watching you.
Or they're just calling to see when you're leaving, right? Because you wouldn't answer, presumably, when you were gone.
No, this was my landline, and my wife was home with the kids. No, that wasn't it. But when we got to Joshua Tree, it was wild, because one guy was coming in from San Diego, and as he approached, we'd go to Jumbo Rocks, where there's a jumping off point, big campground, and then we'd hike into the backcountry. So as he's driving in, there's a man with a camera, older gentleman, white hair, next to a sedan. And as he's driving into the park, this guy flips up his camera, click, 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 and then quickly puts the camera down to his side. Well, Bob, the guy from San Diego who was coming in, Hairgrove, he used to be an insurance investigator. And he said that that's what they were trained to do. If you're doing surveillance, click, 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 and then put your camera down really fast. Then when we got to Jumbo Rocks, there's this beefy Marine type guy, who's muscle bound with a t-shirt. No, it was a sweatshirt with an American flag and looked like a drill sergeant from the local Marine base, 29 Palms, And he supposedly was taking nature shots, which was pretty funny because he had all these video cameras and single lens reflex. But every once in a while, he would pan the cameras over towards us and would be filming us instead of the nature across the campground. So they were pretty heavy-handed in the kind of surveillance. And in one instance, when we had experienced heavy surveillance, the next morning, we had an overflight of 3 waves of F-14s from probably the Naval Air Station. And that was a very sobering experience because we got the impression that the UFO intelligence was in our vicinity. We had a number of sightings. We anticipated the next sighting would be to the east from the way in which the other sightings had occurred during the night. We woke up after a sandstorm. We woke up, in Joshua Tree in the Queen Valley. We're all looking east, thinking that they're going to show up there. And that's the direction that the wave of F-16s were headed. and one was at about 1,000 feet. Then there were two others at about 600 feet. And then the first wave was amazing. They were less than 400 feet above the deck, and they were going full blast across the desert, one on each side of us. I'd never been so close to high-performance jets in my life. The sound was deafening. And it was also against park regulations, which required them to be no less than 2,000 feet above the park floor. So the thought occurred to us that we were being used as bait.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
And that upset me enormously. And I did not do field work at Joshua Tree or in the United States for another 15, 18 months after that. Although I did go to England and did some work in the crop circle region, volunteer work. So this gives you a feel for the conditions that we operated under. And therefore, applying a counterintelligence model to this subject makes sense. In fact, there's a not very well-known article that was written by Val Gurman in the 1990s called The Intelligence Counterintelligence Model for UFO Investigations. I have that article. He's given me permission to put that up on the website. And he goes through the nature of counterintelligence and why that's a more appropriate paradigm than, say, a scientific one, which is what groups like MUFON are trying to pursue, because of the adversarial nature of this topic, because the evidence is not something that you can obtain in a laboratory, but has to be done under fieldwork conditions, which is like an intelligence operation. It's a good article, and I learned a lot. And if people want to go visit my Contact Underground, very, very modest blog site, they can read that article as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the phenomena would kind of use this model. If you read reports or accounts of contact events all the way back to the Middle Ages, there are accounts where someone will have been taken, and when they come back and relate their stories, like the townspeople will turn on them and, either imprison them, kill them. So there was probably a hard learn, because I think these intelligences have been with us for a very long time. I can't prove it, but over that period of time, I'm sure they've learned that you have to be very careful about. It's probably more to protect the contactees than it is to protect them, is what my guess would be. So a lot of this makes sense.
Right. It was a hell of a ride, those 5 years I did with CSETI. And then afterwards, I worked with Rahma and volunteer, of course. Very exciting group. Now I'm pretty much retired. I haven't had a sighting in, over a year now. And, it's really for the next generation of contact activists. And I get to share my articles and to talk to young people who got more energy and more enthusiasm than I could muster. And, if Rahma was the model, then it's not inconceivable that at some time in the future, if the authorities really are going to be more open, we could have a dozen contact teams with video cameras linked to the internet and have simultaneous hovering or even landings and boardings of people on craft. There is a physical component of this phenomenon which exists alongside the psychic element. And what better way to demonstrate peace on Earth and in the cosmos, brotherhood and sisterhood made large, than by having people from all over the planet, not with the government running it, but with the people running it, staging a peaceful human-initiated contact event, HICE, which is the preferred term. I don't particularly like CE5 because CE5 fits into a scientific paradigm of close encounters of the 1 through 4, which was designed by two professional scientists, J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée. And this is not something that is readily studied within a scientific paradigm because of the reasons I outlined. You cannot design an experiment because the intelligence to reliably get information, because the intelligence on the phenomena can't be controlled. They determine when, where they're going to show up and who they're going to be seen by. So the scientific paradigm also assumes that we live in a universe that's objective, and the laws of nature, as we know them, apply throughout the universe. Well, one of the things that Jacques Vallée has pointed out is that this intelligence appears to be able to manipulate space-time. Well, that undermines the whole rationale of the scientific investigation paradigm. So why not use a model or a paradigm which better describes the way in which people actually encounter the phenomenon? And the counterintelligence one is one. Now, something we don't have much time to get into, but maybe in a future program I can talk about another area that I'm very interested in, and that's something I coined about 20 years ago, the virtual experience model, in which I describe how, from a physicalist or materialist perspective, the phenomena uses illusions as a mechanism of contact. And they actually, like Alice in Wonderland or Hansel and Gretel with the path of cookies, they took me on a Hansel and Gretel path and showed me from the very beginning how they use visual illusions to create contact events. So if we have time in the future, we can get into that. But it's a very long, detailed analysis, and it's certainly very controversial because I've postulated that many contact events are virtual memory. They have the technology that can put memory implants, which are as real to you as your recollections as what you had for breakfast. And imagine the facility required to do that, to put in a memory implant that codes for an onboard experience without them having to evade radar, land, take you. All they have to do is have a technology that can create artificial memories. You wake up in the morning, I was on board spacecraft. And there is a physical component to this as well, because they can be picked up on radar. People like Sixto Paz Wells was taken. My friend Fernando Limaco went on board. It was a physical event, multiple witnessed. But the psychic component is so important because it explains many of the inconsistencies and the anomalies associated with the phenomena. So I'm going to say, for a future discussion, the virtual experience model.
Now, when you talk about kind of these live contact events, have they been, I'm assuming they've been attempted before, or is that just something that no one's really tried to organize just yet, at least on a mass scale?
Well, on a mass scale, this UFO exists, the UFO subculture exists as a small segment of the population. Many people are still in denial that this is even real. So to get large numbers of people, the first step is what's happening now, is that there's confirmation that this is real. In order for us to carry out large-scale contact events with multiple teams on a planetary basis, we'd have to have the permission of non-interference of the U.S. military. They wouldn't try to interfere. We're a long way from that, a long way. So I think the interest in human-initiated contact events is growing, of course. It's very simple to do as an individual. I don't recommend people doing it on their own because it can be traumatic. And in my team, I had a chance to screen people as a medical doctor. I made sure people on my team were not only mentally healthy, financially successful, so they could actually take time off to go into the field, but had the support of their families. So I made sure that people on my team had gone through an extensive screening process. But if now there's a CE5 initiative, CE5 app, which Stephen Greal sells for $10, $15. There are a lot of people who are going out and doing it on their own. Most report good experiences. It's non-harmful. But as a doctor, I would not want to give a blanket invitation for people, because some people are not very well in the bonnet, and they might get further along in their mental illness or delusions if they were confronted with non-human intelligence. And the reason why is that this phenomena is reflective. The reason we had so many good experiences is we were part of the love and light crowd. We would send out a message of welcome, unqualified love. We would meditate. We would surround ourselves with that energy of white, loving protectiveness. And guess what we attracted? Beings that were somewhat playful, but were certainly non-harmful. And this may explain why guys in the DIA who went to Skinwalker Ranch had a negative hitchhiker effect. They may have been armed. They were going to think, they may have thought they could kick ET's ass. And they were absolutely terrified when they were fronted with the power of the psychic component of UFO intelligences. And so if you believe in demons, guess what they'll do? They'll show you demons. If you believe in love and light, brotherhood and sister made large, which was the slogan we incorporated into our contact protocols, you got something far more positive.
Yeah, actually, Grant Cameron has mentioned that specifically, that I shouldn't say all, but many of the people who have reported that hitchhiker, the negative hitchhiker effect at Skinwalker, were armed. Or people, not even just hitchhiker effect, but if they had a negative experience, they were armed. They carried weapons onto the ranch. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just give you a quick personal anecdote. So I've actually tried to do it twice alone. Absolutely no result. And then I attempted it with 3 people. There's a place that is adjacent to Skinwalker, and it's called UFO Valley Tours. You can spend the night there. We attempted it there, and yeah, probably a little crazy to pick that location to do it, but I had failed 2 subsequent times, so I'm like, might as well just roll the dice. And I would really have to reach to say that anything happened, but the only thing that happened that night is as I was sleeping, there was a chair between me and the fire, and the wind blew the chair into the fire at me. But that could have just been the wind, right? Who knows?
Sure. So, but it is growing in popularity, and there's on Reddit, which is a social media platform, the Experiencers subthread is very well administered. They have over 60,000 participants. So if people who are contact experiencers, I give a shout out to Reddit, r/experiencers, and you will find many people to share your stories and also get support. And there's a young man from Ireland who's part of that. He goes by the name of Oak Shannon.
Yeah, Oak Shannon's a national security figure, right?
Not Oak Shannon, no. He goes by the name of Oak Drael. It's a Gaelic term. Oak Drael is his nom de guerre. And so they are working to assist contact experiencers, and I encourage him to do CE5 work, but he's working 5, 6, 7 hours a night volunteering to assist people in North America who are having a hard time with their experiences. So if people are out there that want to get involved, I would say go on, and they are experiencers, go on that our Reddit subthread.
Since you mentioned Reddit, and since we're talking about the contact as a intelligence network, there was on the UFO subreddit, there was I think Reddit had some program where they were congratulating, or they were listing the towns that had the most followers on that particular subthread. You know what UFO Reddit was?
Washington, D.C.
Close. Eglin Air Force Base. So completely exposed, because apparently I think they probably operate bot farms out of there, because it's a new technique that they're using nowadays, where they artificially stimulate consensus reality, right? Or at least shape consensus reality.
My friend Oak wages a constant battle against people who are attempting to disrupt conversations, and they can actually, there's a profile that they've have identified as likely to be a bot. And so they will go after those people and eject them. Usually they put out a lot of very negative propaganda, and the administrators at that subreddit are determined to make it a safe place for contact experiencers.
Yeah. And what else should people do if they're trying to do kind of human initiated contact? Especially, it's difficult. It's not always easy to find people and things like that. So if you're doing it on your own, what would you recommend? At first, we already talked about the mental health
Well,
kind
there's
of
also
profilation.
meditation, which is associated. As part of our discipline, we meditated. Every person in my contact team was asked to meditate 15 minutes twice a day. This had some strange results. Personally, I'd never been thought seriously about vegetarianism. But when I started to meditate twice a day, I lost my taste for meat. And I just couldn't swallow meat. The idea of killing an animal for food, when as a physician, I knew that there were other alternatives that were actually more health promoting than meat. So I went through a spiritual transformation. I actually never prayed in my life. I started prayer with some very surprising effects. Actually, I actually was able to effect prayer in such a way that it offered comfort to one of my wife's girlfriends who's going through a very terrible divorce. And so I became transformed, as many contact experiencers are in the process. So I would say focus on spiritual development is important, because that will not only open up your chakras in a way that will be beneficial for you in terms of becoming a more spiritual and loving person, but those intelligences that are able to monitor humanity through telepathy will be more attracted to someone who's thinking that way than watching Grand Theft Auto, smoking, drinking, and going after to conquest as many girls as they can, you know? I mean, so spiritual transformation would be an important part of it. And I mean, the Rahma people were amazing. Rahma teams, before they went out into the field, would get together. If they were going out at the end of the month, on weekends leading up to the contact experience, they would meditate together, eat light meals or fast, which is also supposed to open up your spiritual centers. And they would, of course, they were not only vegetarian, they were strict vegans, because milk and eggs are processed in ways which are harmful to animals. I mean, they don't treat them well. And so you are what you eat, and you spiritually are what you eat. And my friend Joe Vallejo, who joined with the Rahma people because he was flying out of Burbank, and he was a 747 pilot, so he flies all the world. It's easy for him to get up to the Bay Area where Rahma was operating. And he went to some of these sessions, and he says, this is kind of crazy, you know? It's like they're a cult or something, you know? No meat. And then I said to him, Joe, listen, this is a poor man's security check. They don't have the means to do a $10,000 security check on every new person that goes into the group. If an agent infiltrates, they're going to know who he is by the energy he puts out, and the fact that he's not going to want to stop drinking, smoking, and doing all the other things. When you're observing this individual 5, 6, 10 hours a day, several days leading up to traffic, you know. So I said, and then he said, oh yeah, poor man's security check. That makes sense. So there are other practical reasons why these spiritual behaviors are beneficial.
So is Rahma still operating in the Bay Area, or is it kind of...
That team is no longer operational. Fernando Lamaco, who, like myself, is in his 8th decade of life, has moved away, although he may be coming back to Northern California. But there was Enrique Villanueva, who's a hypnotherapist. He brings teams every August up to, and they're with translation, because I was able to integrate into the Rahma network because I spoke Spanish in the emergency room as my travels to Latin America and other places. So they have, in the past, everything was in Spanish, but now with Grant Cameron, and he's written 2 books, if you want to read about that. Mm-hmm. And on my website, I have like half dozen or more articles about Rahma. And so there are people in California who do go up to Mount Shasta in the summertime. There's a pretty high elevation, so you really can only do that contact work at a selected months per year.
Now, during your heyday of doing human-initiated contact events, did you get a sense that there were various factions within the phenomena? Were they more united? Was it just based, as you mentioned earlier, on the energy? Is kind of the species, entity, whatever you want to call it, that's what would show up? What was your sense of that?
Well, the human-initiated contact events that we staged were really limited. Like I said, we had signaling back and forth, so-called photon talk, which is a thrill when you're signaling at something that's non-human intelligence and they're signaling back. It's physical manifestation of very primitive communication. Or we had contact downloads. I had telepathic experiences where beings would appear within my consciousness and they would describe to me who they are, what their philosophy was, all of which was very positive. But we did not have the kind of extensive onboard experiences that was our goal, where I could offer a more definitive answer. Every group that we encountered, either mentally or physically, by craft being in our vicinity. When I was in Mexico at the volcanic zone in 1993, the UFO was within 200-300 yards of our position. It was signaling at us. People on our team were in apparent telepathic communication with the beings, so they got to see them in their mind's eye. It was all very peaceful and cooperative. But if you go to the literature and look at the literature, you get a very different picture, because you have the work of people like David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins, who paint a very negative view of contact experiences. My impression is that, at least as it explained to me from the Rahma people who had the most experience, that the overwhelming majority of groups, non-human intelligences, ETs, are positive and friendly and cooperative. There are in existence some groups that are more in service to themselves than service to others. And that was the mode at which we operated in terms of our network. We were doing this as a voluntary activity, trying to represent a positive aspect of humanity that wanted peace and cooperation. But most people on this planet are compelled to, because of necessity, we have to operate on service to ourselves because no one else is going to do it for us. And so possibly are some ET groups that are less spiritually evolved than they are technologically evolved. And that would explain some of the more negative experiences that contactees and abductees describe. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but again, we were only taking baby steps.
What about the activity of the U.S. call it allied intelligence community in these things? Are they still actively monitoring? Have they kind of let go a little bit? Or what's your sense of that?
I think, of course, they're going to be heavily monitoring the scene. And Grant Cameron, who's one of your frequent guests, has explained it perfectly. He actually quotes a high-level government official who operates through someone called Bill Smith or something, Bob Smith.
Dan Smith?
Dan Smith, yeah. I met Dan Smith once. He gave money to MUFON. He underwrote one of the MUFON meetings, $4,000 he came up with. That was kind of nice to help MUFON.
But Dan Smith, this is somebody that Dan Smith reports to, basically? Yeah,
there's a high government official. I don't like to mention his name, but people in the audience will know.
I think we talked about him before this episode.
Yeah, an individual.
Yes, okay,
So anyway, apparently, according to Dan Smith, who's in communication with this high-level individual, says the phenomena doesn't like us. They don't communicate with us, but they are communicating with the contactees. So, of course, we're going to engage in surveillance. Of course, we're going to follow you around. And I was very grateful. That's all they did was follow us around, because our network was very fragile. We're middle-class people, had jobs, professions, homes. We had cars that had to work to get us to work. If the intelligence services wanted to harass us, they could have put sugar in our gas tanks. Dirty tricks. We'd be out in the field in the middle of the desert and make sure all our tires are flat. What are we going to do? We were operating in areas that didn't have cell phone coverage. So, and this gets back to what we mentioned about Stephen Greer. Stephen Greer is a very complex individual who founded the North American Human-Initiated Contacts Network that he calls CE5. And he still plays a positive role in advocating for the kinds of activities that we carried out together when we were closely associated back in the 90s. But I recall one of the conditions he made with the intelligence services who were courting him. And I remember when he met with Woolsey in December of 1993, and that was set up by someone I also met through Stephen Greer, John Peterson, head of the think tank, Arlington Institute. One of the conditions Greer spoke about was he would cooperate with them under the stated promise that they would not interfere with what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And, I have to admit that as whatever my differences are with Stephen Greer, and they could stretch a mile, I was very appreciative of that we were allowed to function without harassment. And the people who are angry at Stephen Greer for his limitations, well, we all have limitations, who are in support of human-initiated contact, need to have that historical perspective. He may have provided us with cover.
Any final words for the audience?
Well, if you're driving along and you see a UFO, don't just stand there. Flash your signals at them. And if they flash back, then you know it's not United Airlines or the American Air National Guard. Interact. If you're on a path and you got in the forest and you see a UFO flying by, flash at them a few times and see if they interact.
All right, Dr. Burkes, it was an absolute pleasure, and we'll definitely talk soon, I hope. So Thank you again.
Thanks a lot.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.